I came to yoga seeking something. At the time, I didn't know what that was. When I was struggling to find my center in a hectic, complicated life, yoga was a refuge. My days were long, and I had a seemingly endless to-do list. I was transitioning between jobs, married to a man with a high-stress career of his own, and we were raising 3 young, energetic boys. Life in those days felt like a war zone, full of battles that needed to be fought. But later, I concluded that I had to stop fighting altogether. There was no enemy, just a life to be lived. The seeds of this realization were planted on my yoga mat. When my sons were young and giving them attention was an everyday necessity, I still committed to attending yoga classes several times a week that included stretching, breathing, and a few minutes of meditation. Of course, my coveted alone time was sometimes unattainable. However, my quality of life on days I was able to do yoga was noticeably better than on days when I didn't. Yoga offered me a place to go when I wanted to just be, not necessarily to do anything. It was the first place I felt real stillness, the sensation of the clock as having stopped. For a little more than an hour at a time, there was nowhere to go and nothing to do except be alive in my body. And for a woman with a life as complex as mine, stillness and timelessness felt like pure bliss. There was nothing to think about except those few physical focal points related to arriving in each of the different poses. I would focus my attention entirely on my bodily sensations as my thoughts faded into the background. And in that not-thinking state, I became aware of a dimension that I had rarely inhabited previously, and felt a connection to something I didn't feel anywhere else. I felt at peace. Soon, yoga became a trusted and dependable retreat for me, a place where I could go and, for a period, be immersed in an entirely different world. I was able to depend on it. Yoga offered me a sense of serenity I couldn't experience anywhere else, nurtured me in ways I could not have predicted, and transformed the ground that had been a place for winning battles into a fertile soil for planting seeds of growth. What a discovery. Just a few years after I started my regular yoga practice, a great teacher appeared to me following an accident. My own body. A scale fell on my foot in a store while I was grocery shopping, giving me a contusion and fracture. I took care of the fracture and swollen black and blue foot with a boot and the routine rest, ice, and elevation, and thought nothing more of it. But when I continued to experience burning pain at the site of the injury long after the expected 6-week recovery period, I had to seek additional medical attention. My teacher had arrived. After a number of tests, I was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, RSD, or causalgia. RSD, now more commonly called complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS, is a disease of the autonomic nervous system, ANS, which is responsible for the involuntary regulation of our bodily functions, such as our heartbeat and respiration. The ANS includes both the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, where the physiological fight-or-flight stress response is activated and maintained, and the parasympathetic nervous system, PSNS, through which the opposite relaxation response occurs. CRPS alters the sympathetic response in a painful limb in such a way that pain signals are continuously being produced at the site of a trauma long after an injury has healed. The body is essentially hijacked into producing a pain response that feels far worse than the initial trauma and must be endured long after the injury has technically healed. When my foot was damaged, my ANS, normally running in the background of my consciousness, suddenly pushed its way to the forefront and made itself the center of my world. Almost all I thought of was pain and my hope of relief from pain. But there was no relief, and I could see no way out. After multiple medical consults, taking a series of medications that made me feel loopy, forgetful, and fatigued, I received 16 injections of a nerve-blocking anesthetic. I was still experiencing horrific pain. It was as if my foot was literally on fire. I would sit for hours and often tried to sleep with my foot wrapped in ice packs. I felt devastated.